Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today on our live broadcast with the founder of Tofurky, Mr. Seth Tibbott. We will be getting started shortly, bringing Seth, our esteemed guest, in at 10:30 a.m. I'm just on here a minute or so early to just say warm welcome to everybody. Thank you for coming. Happy Mental Health Awareness Month in May here. We're coming to a close. And as well, too, for all of you out there, happy Meatless Monday. There's a reason why we are doing this live broadcast today, being Meatless Monday, and of course in Mental Health Awareness Month. So hopefully we'll have some tips and some great stories from Seth. So sit tight, enjoy the broadcast, and without further ado, I am going to warmly welcome Seth with a quote by Guy Raz. Seth Tibbott is an American original. His story is so outlandish, so unbelievable, you'd think it was fiction. Ladies and gentlemen, please put your hands together and help me welcome Mr. Seth Tibbott. Hi, Seth.
Good morning, Justin. How are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you? Is it
Doing good. It's great to
is
be
it
here. Thanks for
rainy in
having me.
Oregon like it is here in Vancouver?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Is it rainy in Oregon like it is here in Vancouver?
Yes, it is raining in Oregon today, so that's par for the course.
Well, listen, Seth, we are so happy to have you. I know myself, a lot of my colleagues, friends, and family. We are definitely supporters of the Tofurky brand, and we're going to get a little bit more into several different aspects of not only yourself and your origin story, the origin story of Tofurky. But why don't we start there, and why don't you jump and roll right into the origin story that is Seth Tibbott?
Oh, yeah, great. Well, I was born and raised in the Washington, D.C. area, and my parents both worked for the government. There was no background of entrepreneurship in my family, but my parents were sort of on the older side. My father was 50 when he got married for the first time, and I came in when he was 56. And he was a very humorous guy and an artist, and his big thing was penguins. So I always like to say I was raised by penguins. We had penguins all over my house, and he was a penguin artist, and he drew Christmas cards with penguins every year. So that's kind of my spirit animal, and was a way for my parents, I think, to impart sort of a lighthearted, humorous bone in my body, I guess. I went to college in Ohio after finishing high school when I was 18. And I got to Ohio and I was like, wow, this is so much greener and more rural than the Washington, D.C. area where I'd been raised. So it was really fun to be there. And during the course of study at Wittenberg University in Springfield, Ohio, which is southern Ohio near Dayton and Columbus, I went to a friend's house and had a dinner of lentils, rice, and onions. This was like 1971, and there was no real information about vegetarianism at that point. And there was nothing about the health of the diet. There was nothing about the environmental impacts of the animal agriculture sector, and there was really nothing about how animals were treated either. I mean, PETA, which was the first kind of animal advocacy group in the farm animal sector, didn't start till 1980. So, anyways, I had this delicious meal, and it just felt great, and I was like wowed by it. So I became a vegetarian almost overnight. You know, it really resonated to me most from an environmental perspective because I was kind of a teacher naturalist, and I thought, oh boy, after reading Diet for a Small Planet, after I had this meal, it really cemented the fact that animals were a very inefficient way of manufacturing protein. And you took 16 or 12 pounds or whatever pounds of grain and poured it into this animal, and then in return you only got a very little, maybe 1 pound or less of protein. So I started thinking, you know what, if everybody was vegetarian, then there'd be a lot less pressure on the wildlife habitat of the lands that I care so much about, and I saw being usurped by agriculture in Ohio. They used to say squirrel could jump from Pennsylvania to Indiana on a tree's branch to branch without ever touching ground. But by 1971, I think 80 or 90% of Ohio was farmland and not forest. So that was my reason to become a vegetarian. But I was a very poor vegetarian. I was not eating meat, but I was eating junk. I was eating vanilla wafers and I was eating chips. And, there wasn't, in my defense, there wasn't a lot of food in the stores in the plant based movement at that point. Like, in fact, there was nothing. Unless it was, just fruits and vegetables, which are great, but there were no meat alternatives. There was no plant-based milk, no yogurt. Couldn't even find tofu or tempeh in the store. And the one product that you could find, but it was only in these small little boutique shops, was granola. And I had been making my own granola, and that was like the first vegan vegetarian food that I was able to buy, but it was only in this one little tiny boutique store in Springfield. And then 5 years later, I came back through Springfield on my way west to Oregon, where I had gotten a job after college as a teacher naturalist. And I went into the store in Springfield, Ohio, and there was a whole granola section, and it was like, 20 feet long, and there was this kind of granola and that. And I was like, whoa, the hippies who were into granola were right about this, and they're probably going to be right about tempeh. So that was really my inspiration for starting the making tempeh in 1980 after 8 years as a teacher naturalist in Oregon.
Yeah, and that's wild in today's market to think about not seeing tempeh, not seeing tofu, and not seeing all of these plant milks and everything that's available right now. So of course, kudos to you for sticking with that at that point in time, being significantly more difficult than it is now. But nonetheless, the reasons for doing it now and the reasons for doing it back then still hold true more than ever. And so suffice to say that you then started Turtle Island Foods in 1980, primarily making tempeh. Is that right?
Solely making tempeh. I didn't make tofu or any other products because I was I had fallen in love with tempeh about 4 years earlier in 1977 when I was working in Tennessee as a teacher naturalist. And I was very close to this big hippie commune called The Farm, which was it's founded in 1972 by Stephen Gaskin, who was a creative writing teacher at San Francisco State. And he developed quite a following. He was a vegan but back then it was called pure vegetarian. The word vegan was created by Donald Watson in 1944 or 5 in the UK, I believe. And but it wasn't in the vernacular in this country till much later. So in 1977, I went to the farm, and I had been reading a lot of his books, and they had a cookbook called the Farm Vegetarian Cookbook because they had 1,200 people living on this commune on 1,600 acres, and they were all eating a pure vegetarian diet. And so one of the recipes in the cookbook that I was using to support myself as then an early, it was my first pass at vegan in the 1970s, was a recipe for soy grit burgers. I don't know if you remember soy grits, but they were just ground up little pieces of soybeans, raw soybeans that you molded together with whole wheat flour and different spices, and then I'd fry them in a pan, and that was my main protein substitute. Because my mom, she was like, "Oh, mom," she was like, "Oh, you're a vegetarian. You're not going to get enough protein. You're going to die." She was freaking out, and I was like, "No, mom, I'm okay. I'm going to eat soybeans." But the problem with the soy grit burgers were they tasted bad, but they digested worse. I mean, they were really a handful to really keep going with. And so I read in their cookbook about tempeh, and they were saying this is so delicious that kids come back for seconds and thirds, and our big trucker kind of farmer guys, they love tempeh. Everybody loves tempeh, and they said the nice thing about it too is it's very digestible. It's one of the most digestible foods, the proteins easiest to assimilate in the human body of any proteins. And so I was like, whoa, there's a concept. It tastes great and it digests well. I got to get some of this. So on one of my first weekends off from teaching, I went over to the farm in Tennessee and I spent the night there. And I picked up some of this tempeh starter that was in a little vial, black liquid, and it had an instruction sheet. And tempeh comes from Indonesia, and it's a fermented food. So what I had to do was I had to cook the soybeans and then dehull the soybeans by hand by rubbing them between my hands. And it's harder than you think to get a hull off a soybean, let me tell you that. And it took a long time, but I did that. And then I put some of the magic mold, actually. Rhizopus oligosporus is one of the good guy that you can put in your intestinal tract. And I put it out in a field in a pan with a covering over it because Tennessee is very much like Indonesia. It's like in the 80s pretty much every day. And even in the night, it doesn't get too cold. So it was perfect conditions. I went back the next day, 24 hours later, I peeled back the pan and whoa, here was this beautiful white blanket of mold. And I know that doesn't sound great to people, but to me, it looked good and it smelled mushroomy. And I had seen the pictures of what good tempeh looks like in their literature, and this looked just like it. So I was excited and I ran into the cook tent and I said to the cook, let's cook this up. And the staff was all sitting around there in the hot Tennessee afternoon drinking beer, so their caution was lowered and they were willing to give it a go. And we ate tempeh, and for me, that meal was just this aha moment, and I was like floored. It was love at first bite. Even though some of my friends who were at that meal later confided in me, said we weren't sure that we were going to make it out of this. We thought we might die, I mean, because of the mold and all, and first time through, but nobody did. And I went back to Oregon and started making it for friends and family more and more. And then in 1980, when Ronald Reagan came to power, a lot of my environmental teaching jobs suddenly were like ixnayed, and I didn't have anything going for work. So I was like, maybe this is a time to start business. And I looked around and I saw that there really wasn't very much or any tempeh that was any good that was on the market at that point. Because one thing about tempeh is it's rather new to this country. Tofu has been in this country since the early 1900s. I think 1904 or 5, the first tofu shop in America was opened in Portland, Oregon, and it's still there, Oda Tofu. But tempeh didn't come along into this country commercially until 1975. And a teacher in Nebraska started making it. So I was one of the first tempeh shops to be opening them. So I had a lot of education to do, but I was just pretty thrilled to be in business because I knew nothing about business. I mean, and when I mean nothing, I mean less than nothing. And I was in love with tempeh and a tempeh maker, but anybody in the country probably knew more about how to run a business than I did. But I was so happy. In 1980, in December 1st, I sent in my papers and $20 to the Secretary of State of Oregon and started Turtle Island Soy Dairy was the name of the company at that point. And I went out to my aunt's house for Christmas in Minnesota. And I was so excited. And I sat down with her one night after a meal and I said, Aunt Rosie, I am going to start my own business. I'm going to make tempeh and soybeans, and it's moldy soybeans, and it's going to be great. And I was so enthusiastic, and she just stopped me and goes, Seth, stop. This is a bad idea. This is a terrible idea. This is a meat eating country. It's always going to be meat eating country, and nobody is going to want to eat soybeans, much less moldy ones. So please don't open your business. It's going to be a mistake. And I was like, oh, thanks, Rosie, for that vote of confidence. But I went back and I didn't listen to her. And I started making tempeh, and the first commercial batch came out in 1981. I had rented the night kitchen that wasn't being used at night of my local co-op in Forest Grove, Oregon, which is 20 miles east of Portland, Oregon. And I could make about 100 pounds when the fermentation went well. And, scaling up anything, I was soon to learn, is more troublesome than you would think. And I had a lot of failures. I buried a lot of early tempeh batches that didn't come out in my garden, and I became a hero to the local rufous-sided towhee community who would pick through there and get their protein. They weren't so picky as I was. And but I started making tempeh in 1981 and delivering it in once a week into the natural food stores and restaurants in Portland, Oregon. So that was really the first money that I ever took in. But it was, I was selling tempeh for, I think, 70 cents a cake. And so, if you made 100 pounds, you can do the math. You can see it wasn't a lot of money. And so I was very poor, but I was very excited, because I had this mission of bringing low on the food chain protein to America that really made ecological sense for everybody. And I thought it was also going to be beneficial nutritionally, but there was still a lot to learn about vegan diets and about tempeh and proteins and everything back then. But that was a very exciting time. And thank you, Ronald Reagan, for taking away my livelihood and forcing me into this. But thank you, Jimmy Carter, too, for allowing me to be a naturalist and save up money by he had a lot of environmental programs, which were great for me. So I basically benefited from a Republican administration and a Democrat administration, too. So it was a great start. So I invested $2,500 of my own money to start what is today the Tofurky Company.
Yeah, and before we get to 1995 with the Tofurky Company and the introduction of Tofurky coming to market, I couldn't find anywhere in preparation for our conversation today, Seth, about the impetus and the reasoning behind Turtle Island Foods. Is there a story, or is it something simple with
for the name? Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll give you my shameless book club. This is a book that I have written called In Search of the Wild Tofurky, How a Business Misfit Pioneered Plant-Based Foods Before They Were Cool. It's available on Amazon and in anywhere books are sold. But and we go about it. It tells the story in there of why Turtle Island, and it basically, Turtle Island was the name that the Modoc Native Americans in the Sierra Nevada mountain range in California had for the earth. They believed that the whole North America, anyways, was on the back of a big turtle who had rose out of the sea and offered its shell for the land animals to live, because at that point there was no place for land animals, and the turtle shell was perfect for North America. So you actually live on Turtle Island, Justin, as do I. And anytime there's like an earthquake, it's just the turtle shifting its shell and the weight, because we're heavy and getting heavier, by the way. So it's an origin story, Turtle Island, and that was it, because my girlfriend at the time, Kim, said, "Oh, you should. It's tempeh comes to Turtle Island. It's called it Turtle Island tempeh." But that was the origin story. You don't hear about that much anymore. There was a book of poetry by Gary Snyder called Turtle Island, and he popularized that story. So I had read that, but now, and there were Turtle Island string quartets and Turtle Island herbs and Turtle Island this and that. But you don't hear about it that much, so I'm not surprised you didn't find much.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing, because I did have the thought, because I have heard of that folklore about Turtle Island before, resting on the shell of the turtle, and so I was curious. I didn't quite know, but diving into the book, I'm sure shortly here in the future, I'm going to have a lot more answers to questions, some that we're maybe even going to dive into right now. So for everybody here who's unfamiliar with what Tofurky brings to the table, this is a good image from the Tofurky website, really showcasing 3 of the SKUs of their product line. They have their, of course, vegan plant-based chicken on the right-hand side there, in between the peppers and carrots. And then near the bottom, you have the tempeh that Seth and his company has perfected since the very beginning. And then at the top left there, of course, with the nice grill marks on there, you see you have the sausage. And so why don't we roll into the transition into you coming to the realization that, there's just like you did with the tempeh, there's a gap in the market, there's an opportunity here. So maybe instead of having bird at the table, what about Tofurky? And before I let you roll right into that, I found this very, very interesting. The product name Tofurky is a portmanteau of tofu and turkey into a single word, which sounds like a spoonerism of faux turkey. So why don't we roll into what was the impetus behind Tofurky?
Yeah, sure. So as you'll read in the book, the first 15 years of business were very fun and had a lot of great stories. And, I was making tempeh only for those years, but I was really failing as a business person, I guess. I was living the first 9 years. I took home pay. My take home pay was $31,000, which comes to $300 a month for living expenses. So I had to live low and keep my overhead low. And I built a tree house that lived in the tree house for 7 years. I was living in teepees, trailers that smelled like mouse urine. I mean, it was really a Spartan life, but a fun one too. But after 10 years of this, I started to really question whether this was a sustainable path for me to follow, and should I try my hand at something else. So I was experimenting with writing and doing different jobs. I was working on a treehouse book, and then a momentous thing happened in my life. I fell in love. I got married, and soon thereafter, we were excited to bring into this world our son Luke. And so now the game had changed a little bit. I couldn't just live in my tree on 300 a month anymore. I was needing to make more money to help support this new family. And so I started to experiment at that point, just the first stages of a pivot. Pivoting in business is a really time honored and important thing. You look at some of the famous pivots, like YouTube it started out as a dating site. And then they pivoted into the broader sense, where they realized there was more money and interest in people's cat videos or whatever, so it was a big pivot. Starbucks started out, just as a machinery selling like grinders and coffee making machines. And then Howard Schultz went over there to Italy and he saw that there was this coffee house culture and he brought that back and they pivoted into that. So it's pivoting is a big thing in business. And, as you go along, you learn more about the market and what sells and what doesn't. And I still believed in tempeh, but I started to think, maybe since tofu is more popular, looking at tofu. And then I always remembered that the Thanksgiving was a really kind of awkward time for me personally and for a lot of vegetarians. I used to go to these Thanksgivings up in the mountains with my friends and naturalist friends, and we would spend the weekend in a small little cabin. And we were always trying to experiment with, different holiday vegetarian options. And one of the fails they were all failures. Like we had a stuffed pumpkin that collapsed in the oven and made this big mess. And then we had a gluten roast that you couldn't cut with a chainsaw. I mean, it was just horrible. So my goal was I got to find something that's bomb proof, convenient, and easy to use that people will enjoy. And I was looking for that. And I had been experimenting with tofu. And I went to deliver some tempeh to my friend Hans Robel of the Higher Taste. And he was in Portland it was in November, and he was making these stuffed tofu roasts. And they were really good. And I bought one, I brought it home, and I called up Hans. I said, boy, this is really good. We should go into business. And so we started to experiment with, names, because I had a little bigger reach so I could sell. He was just selling in Portland and I was selling up and down the West Coast at that point. And I remembered in 1981 when I was delivering tempeh into the natural food stores in Portland that there was this sandwich called a Tofurky sandwich, and it was just tofu that was sort of flavored to be like tofu, was like turkey. It was baked, and I would eat that for lunch. But I always loved the name Tofurky, so I didn't invent the name Tofurky, but the sandwich shop had stopped making that, after a couple of years, and nobody had trademarked the name. So I decided against again the people in the company that really thought Tofurky's a silly name. That's a stupid name. You don't want to do that. And we actually sent out a little postcard with the first Tofurky saying, which name is better, the Healthy Gobble or Tofurky? And just about nobody said Healthy Gobble or stuffed tofu roast. And so Tofurky won out, and it became a hit. In 1995, we had the stuffed tofu roast, and I had made these tempeh drumsticks that were meant to be a burger at first, but they tasted more like Thanksgiving. So we stamped them out to drumsticks, and we had a gravy in there, and we put in these stamped self-addressed postcards just wanting feedback. Did you like it? Was the texture okay? Was it flavor? And we just got inundated with comments, and people were like, oh man, this is like the best thing. And I've been waiting 20 years for this product. I'm not a second class citizen anymore. Thanksgiving, I can bring this in. It's easy to cook. I put it in this table, and wow, it just is a conversation starter, but it's delicious. So I had never seen that kind of response in the 15 years I'd been in business. So I was like, boy, I think we've discovered this niche that hasn't really been explored. It's every marketer's dream to find a niche that is untapped and it has this big following. So we made 818 Tofurkys that year, and stores that got behind it were finding great success. In fact, one chain of stores in Seattle had to put in the Tofurky hotline where people could call and order and ask questions and everything. So that was the first Tofurky hotline, was 1995. And, it was a winning concept right from the start. But we also got feedback that the texture needed some work, and the flavor could be better. And so the first 3 years we were marketing only the holiday roast. We weren't marketing deli slices or sausage or chicken or anything. And at that point, it was we had three different recipes the first 3 years, but the 1997 version was pretty much the same basic recipe that we have now, although we've tweaked that even a little bit as we have gone along. But that was really the start of the Tofurky, and so that was a pivot from tempeh and to Tofurky, which was really great because too the other nice thing about it was for the tempeh sales, which were then growing and growing and growing. But if there was a slack time in the tempeh world, it was always November and December when people were, in the holiday mode, and they stopped thinking about their healthy foods and they started, eating other things. So January would come and tempeh would come back with a vengeance, but it was really slow then. So it was great to have now. I have this product that makes November and December like crazy popular month for us.
Yeah, wow. And so we'll dive a little bit more a little bit later into if you have any, tips for founders, because I know where I am here in Vancouver, British Columbia, there's amazing local tempeh makers, plant-based companies that are, really making their own products. And so if there's any tips for founders later on that we can get into that, I'm sure that that would be valuable for those watching. But you already dropped two in there, I believe, and one of them was the ability to have the awareness to pivot is one that I heard, and then the second would be kind of staying true to the path. It sounds like Rosie and others were saying like, nope, not a good idea. Don't do this, don't do that, and it seemed like you had the whether it was just you yourself or a group of trusted confidants that really pushed it forward. But yeah, I think that's two big tips right there: is having the awareness to pivot when need be, and then as well too, stay true to the path there. And forgive me if I have any of these figures wrong in any way, but estimated global sales annually over 100 million for the company right now, and then estimated revenue. I'm just trying to get into the systems here in the back end. 100 million and of over 24 million. So, but nonetheless, one thing that I did want to point out is the importance that you and your team have placed since since the inception of Tofurky on avoiding GMOs. And as well, something that I personally love about Tofurky is the lack thereof soy protein isolate. So those are two big things for me that I don't know if you want to touch on the importance of no GMOs as much as you can, and maybe if you have any insights on soy protein isolate, I just kind of want to open that up to you.
Yeah, good comments, Justin. First of all, from the get-go, we've always tried to use, organic ingredients wherever we can, wherever it's financially and feasible to create the product. And then where we're not using organic, we're always specifying non-GMO. Um, you know, they're both, and then you mentioned the soy protein isolates and concentrates. They're both built around this idea that we want to use wherever possible the traditional forms of soy. Tofu and tempeh have been around the block, for centuries, and they've been proven to be a healthy form of soy, and it's what we call these traditional forms of soy are more lightly processed as opposed to the isolates and concentrates that you talk about that are more heavily industrially processed. So we separate. There's the industrial forms of soy, and there's the traditional forms of soy, and so those are two different things. And the industrial forms of soy are actually made with they're extracted. You know, what you do is you take the beans and you flatten the beans and you put them in a vat of this ecotoxin actually called hexane, which is the way that the starch and the protein gets separated in these. And after you bring the beans out of the hexane evaporates, but it goes up into the atmosphere, and parts per million of hexane remain on the isolates or the concentrates, which means that, you know, hexane is actually an ingredient in gasoline too. And we just go, well, why would you want any parts per million of this in your food? So for the most part, all these years, you know, we've been sticking to the traditional forms of soy, and we base everything on organic tempeh and organic tofu, which really takes out the GMO from the conversation, because you can't have an organic product in the with GMOs at this point, although there's been proposals to allow for that, but thankfully those haven't gone through. So if you're buying organic and if you're buying Tofurky, you are buying by default non-GMO product. It looks like we're frozen up a little bit, so I'll just expand on that a little bit and you know, say that it's also true that some of these proteins that you have now, like the pea protein isolate and soy protein isolate, they do have some functionality and they have some great textures and flavors. And you know, we always sort of look at things and we say, are we missing the forest for the trees? And you know, I'm a big fan of some of these newer products too, that have come out. You know, the Beyond Burger and the Impossible Burger, because you know we are at a worldwide tipping point right now where we really need to change and get people away from the horrible habit of eating animals. And so that big picture, I think, is something for, you know, to be aware of. And I think a lot of these products that are new on the market now are healthy and good, but Tofurky, for the most part, has chosen to go another way. I guess we're having technical difficulties here. Well, I know that Justin gave me an outline and looks like he's dropped off for a second. So I'll just continue on with the story here, which is that after the first 3 years of marketing Tofurky, we decided that, boy, this is nice to be part of Americana. You know, we were getting on the Today Show, the Tonight Show, and everything in between, X Files. It was an amazing time from the media standpoint. But after January 1st would come, and after the holiday buzz and the holiday rush of orders had all stopped, we noticed that we then shrank back down to just this regional producer of products, whereas in the holiday time, we were able to ship products all the way across country and even up into Canada, and starting to get interest from different countries of the world. So it was a much bigger pool. And we were like, I wonder how we can keep this ball rolling. And after January 1st, so what we did was we just started to go with a nice deli slice product. We looked at it and we said, boy, this Tofurky really slices nicely. So we came out with deli slices and they became a hit. I went over to England in 1999 to start selling products, and I noticed that in England, there wasn't so much of the burgers, like you saw all these garden burgers and Boca burgers over here, but there was all these sausages, and there was no sausage in vegan sausages in America. So I kept on, and we introduced sausage, and that became a hit. So these everyday products now are way bigger than even the holiday products, which are still popular, and we've sold about 5 million Tofurkys. I see that somebody has written in, Sandra Nomoto has said, what are your thoughts on the lab grown meat being produced by new companies? And that's a great question, Sandra. And, you know, I'm all for it. I think that it has a great potential along with plant-based foods. Plant-based foods and cellular meat or clean meat have a real opportunity now to make a big splash and become the dominant paradigm of protein in this country. And the reason that I think that is that, you know, it's so efficient and so kind, I mean, not to eat animals, that if the product is tasty and if it is put out at a price that people can afford, I think that the lab grown market will be readily accepted. Like, you know, people say, oh, you know, are people going to really accept eating something coming from a lab? They've already been sold the most inefficient, cruel way ever of producing protein in the world. And you're telling me that if it's delicious and the price is right and the texture's right, the people will say, what? We need our protein to come the old way when it could possibly have E. coli and all of these contaminants, and it was terrible on the planet, and we're going to insist on that. And I don't think that's true. I think that clean meat has a real opportunity in plant-based foods, and we really have to look at the size of the opportunity here. Like now, things are growing in the plant-based space so fast. It's unbelievable what we're seeing in the stores. Like grocery stores, if they sell 2% more food than they did last year, like in all food, they're celebrating. They're drinking champagne and going, woohoo, we grew by 2%. So if they see a category growing 5%, which 5 years ago was the plant-based foods category, they're like, whoa, we got to get more of this in because it's growing at more than twice what all food is. So this is a hot category. Now, I just bought the March AC Nielsen information and statistics for the category, and this category is up 128% over March 2019. So unbelievable growth, and the grocery stores don't know, what to do with it. But it shows me the strength of the category and that there's this market for not just plant-based meats, but I think for cellular meats as well. So, and even with this 128% growth rate, we're still about 1% of the protein market. So there's 99% of the protein market is in the US. Anyways, I'm not sure what it is in Canada. Hi, Justin. Good to have you back. But I think that, you know, it's really a big job to go from 1% up to, well, over, let's just say 50% to become the dominant paradigm. So it's bigger than one approach, it's bigger than one company, and I'm just thrilled to see all of these experimentations coming and that are, getting us out of this cruel and inefficient way of growing meat. Like, for instance, I read that in the cellular meat, I'm not an expert on it, but you can grow chicken in a lab in 6 days. Right now is what they've done it. And, even if you're just forget about the cruelty and all the environmental impacts of raising chickens, it's something like 6 weeks to grow chicken up to slaughter weight. So that is a huge jump in efficiency. And anytime you can make a jump in efficiency, you look about that in history, you will see that there is a market for that. And, somebody is going to jump on that and industrialize that and make a lot of money and do a good job of making that available.
Yeah, nice to be back. Sorry, technical difficulties, but nonetheless,
No worries.
you're a pro. Moving on, you bring up an interesting segue and something that I wanted to talk about. So for everybody watching, there's been, over the course of the last couple of years, there's been some M&As, of mergers and acquisitions, of certain companies by, larger, heavily cruel based companies purchasing and gobbling up cruelty-free companies. And so I wanted to give you an opportunity to speak to the fact that something that I find absolutely, fascinating, admirable, the like, is Tofurky's a family-owned, family-run company and has zero funding and is going to, in my eyes, keep using that as an advantage. Is that safe to say?
Well, you always have to examine your key principles in business, but you're right. We're 41 years and independent and family owned, and that has been amazing. I stepped down as president CEO 5 years ago, and my stepson, Jamie Athos, is doing a great job running things and carrying things into the future. But as far as the meat companies buying these smaller entrepreneur-driven companies, yeah, I've seen a lot of those go down, and rarely has it been good for the company and for the workers that work there. Although now there's more sophistication to the market, and I think we're starting to see some of these meat companies are finally getting it and doing a good job at marketing and bringing these plant-based products into their distribution channels and getting it out to more and more people. I think that as a consumer, I'm always sorry on one level to see these change hands, but on the other hand, you look at animal agriculture right now is feeling very threatened, and rightfully so, even though we're still, but a fly on their shoulder, like 1%, but they're very threatened. And so there's two real responses to this threat that I'm seeing. One is there are people that are saying we need to fight this. And those are the people like the Missouri Cattlemen's Association and the Arkansas Cattlemen's Association in this country who have, basically convinced the legislatures in those states to ban the words, plant-based meat. Anything, if you use the word meat, it has to come from a slaughter. Well, oh, I'm sorry, harvested. That's the word they use. They don't use slaughtered animal, they use harvested animal. And so they are trying to crush, that's their response. And the other response are the people like up there, Maple Leaf Foods up in Toronto, in Canada, where you are. And, Tyson's, Nestle, there's a whole bunch of ones that are seeing the future and they're going, hey, you know what? We sell protein. This is protein. There's a market for it. The trend line is going up. Maybe we should rethink our business model and maybe we should pivot into a new form of making protein. So, they are basically, you can't beat them. Maybe we join them. And, I think, it's like Victor Hugo has said, there's nothing so powerful as an idea whose time has come. And the people that realize that are and get behind these ideas that have come are the ones that are ultimately going to benefit. And I think the ones that are just like, we've got to crush this and we've got to keep doing things like we've always done are the ones that are going to be the losers in the long run.
Wow, well said. True leader there. Now, in terms of you and your company being, as you said, independent from beginning to current, just for those watching, some interesting points to note about Tofurky. The Green Stars project awarded Tofurky 5 out of 5 Green Stars for overall social and environmental impact. Some of the key points to note are Tofurky's beautiful new facility was built to LEED Platinum standards. They are a B Corp certified company. They purchased their electricity from the Blue Sky Renewable Energy Project. They have a waste minimization program, and their outer packaging is made from recycled cardboard and printed with low VOC inks. And lastly, a certain percentage of each year's Tofurky sales is donated to an environmental charity. So with all that being said, are you still hearing any push on the use, the negative use of maybe plastic, or, Tofurky has high sodium? Are you hearing all the positives that you guys are doing? Are you still hearing any harsh criticisms of the company?
Yeah, there's always room to improve, and certainly, the plastic issue is a huge one. The reality is, we use vacuum sealing equipment, and there just isn't an option. We use the vacuum sealing barrier film in order to A, protect the consumer, and B, to get the shelf life that you need in order to get this product out to the world. So unfortunately, on the plastic, we're really not able to, at this time, we've looked high and low to see if there is a film with the barrier properties that we need in order to protect our customers. And, at the long run, you have to feel like safety first for the one thought. And then the second thought is you really have to think, what is our biggest environmental impact here? And, it's like you can go to the store and you can say, is it paper or plastic? Which do you want? And you can bring your own bags. And what's the impact of that? Versus, animal agriculture is the biggest form of greenhouse gases on the planet. And it's bigger than, all forms of transportation combined. And so we have to feel like there, as much as there are negatives, and you did mention too that are negatives, and we would like to ameliorate both the plastic and sodium too is something, although our sodium is lower than a meat-based sausage by a factor of 30 to 50%, depending on what it is. Our customers don't necessarily all shop and use that as a metric. So that is something that we've tried to improve on by going to potassium, and we've had some success. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, the reality is taste is king, value is queen, and everything else is marketing. And the food needs to taste yummy, or you can have the best environmental footprint, you can have the best nutrition, but if the product isn't tasty, our experience is that it's not going to work out. And we feel like flavor is the portal to the human heart, and it's the only way that we're going to succeed. Activists have been begging people to stop eating meat for decades, from environmental standpoints, from cruelty standpoints, but it's only until the last 5 years when the texture and flavor of these meat alternatives has gotten so high, and to the point that a meat eater can actually go, I can live with this, and I think this is good, that the needle is being moved significantly. So in order to stay in the game, there's compromises and sacrifices. There's no such thing as a perfect person. There's no such thing as a perfect food. Well, maybe avocados, right? Or I don't know, but we're just doing the best we can in order to get people away from the destructive habit of eating meat.
Yeah, and in preparation for our conversation today, that was the only tough question that I could come up with, and how I prefaced it by all of the amazing things that the company is doing, and that the lens that I was looking through that question was, who knows who this might reach, and through conversation there might be a connection made and a resource that can blossom and flourish. So I mean, you can't hate on a company who's doing 99% amazing for one thing that they're even still doing better than most on. So kudos on that point. And you just rolled right into what I found really, really fascinating reading up on you. Kind of like an aha moment almost as well for me. And that was your 4 irrefutable truths. We all know it's good for the animals. We all know it's good for the environment. We all know it's good for our health. But the 4th one that you put on there was, it's delicious. And there's, in my own experience cooking for my family, who doesn't follow the same lifestyle that I do, the easiest way to a non-vegan's heart is with delicious vegan food. And so I found that very interesting, how you added that 4th pillar in there, that we just think of animals, environment, and health, but you're really living it with your company and what you're able to produce in terms of it being absolutely delicious. Now, being a founder of such a successful large company, and again, up here in the west coast of Canada, there are a lot of founders of plant-based vegan companies that are no doubt inspired by you and your story and what you've been able to accomplish and achieve. And I just kind of wanted to lead this next little bit here. If you have or had any initiatives or tips specifically for founders in the plant-based vegan space.
Yeah, sure. First of all, I would say the superpower of all vegan companies is that baked into the DNA of the company is a mission. And this is true from, your smallest little granola or cookie maker selling their goods at the farmer's market, all the way up to Patrick Brown, Ethan Brown, the Impossible Burger and Beyond Burger guys. Everybody I've yet to meet a vegan company that doesn't have a mission. And having the mission is so important to remember, because a lot of times, the money isn't really there yet. I mean, for me, the money wasn't there for really 20 years. I thought that, it was 20 years before I was actually able to make a profit. I call it my 20-year overnight success story. And, even though the money wasn't there, the mission was always there to keep me in the game. And the longer you stay in the game, you're hanging around, you're becoming less stupid every single day that you turn the key and you go in there. And that really gets you to possibly your Tofurky moment as a small vegan startup entrepreneur. So I would say remembering the mission and having the mission is the one key. The other thing that I think is really important that is good for me, or has been good for me, I could count on one hand the number of people that have been fired, at Tofurky when I was like growing and doing it. But I did fire one person over and over again, and that was myself. And knowing when to fire yourself is like one of the most important things that I think a founder and entrepreneur can do, because when you're starting out, I've done every job at Tofurky, and when I was the only employee for a long time, and I've done production, I've done janitorial, I've done logistics, I've done marketing, I've done sales, but every time that I fired myself from a job, ironically, the job improved. And was it because I was doing a particularly bad job? Sometimes, yes, there was people that could do it better, but a lot of times it was just, spreading myself too thin. And like the day that I hired my first national sales manager was just like this amazing moment where, when I look back, that's where we had this exponential growth curve sort of start happening. And, this was a person that lived and breathed. He got up in the morning and he's like, how am I going to sell more Tofurky today? It wasn't like, how am I going to sell more Tofurky today? And what's this marketing plan? And what do I do for the Thanksgiving? And maybe, oh, you have a problem at customer service? Yeah, I'll take care of that. It's like you're doing too many things. So as you grow and as you can afford to fire yourself, it's just like a key thing. And I think, I work with a lot of nonprofits and I work with different small businesses now. And it's really tragic to see a founder that hasn't learned to fire themselves. I mean, I've seen businesses, just driving the good people crazy in a way by the founder being too intimately involved with the details of business that they have no business being in. And, the proof of firing myself, I think, was really even the biggest time I fired myself, which was firing myself from being president when I was like, I think I was 64 when that happened, and having this really powerful person, Jamie, who just had so much energy, and he was willing to take this on and continue the dream into the future. And it's just so great now to have him doing stuff that I just couldn't do at all. And the way he's managed COVID and everything, when we've had double the amount of orders, and yet at the same time we've had to make on the fly adjustments to our production lines to keep everybody safe. The organization that he's built and the communication within the company, he's much more organized than I am and able to do that. And so I'm just so thankful for that. And I'm so thankful that I fired myself from that. And, because if you don't give people that come in, it's very rare to have an employee like Jamie that are excited about, ready to take on the power. And if you disenfranchise them and say, no, I'm just going to keep on being, president, you are qualified, but I'm not ready to do that. And I've seen it kill businesses. I've seen it kill nonprofits. And it's just really, really threatening, to hold on too tightly and think that you're irreplaceable. You know how you tell if someone's irreplaceable, Justin? You put your finger in a cup of water and you pull it out, and if the hole doesn't fill back in, then they're irreplaceable. But I've put my finger in the cup and I pulled it out, and you know what? The hole filled back in. So I guess I wasn't irreplaceable. So, really knowing when to pull the plug on different jobs and turn it over to, a marketing professional, a logistics professional, and as you grow, and that's a stage, because at first you have to do it all, and doing it all yourself, by the way, is really beneficial because it gives you empathy for these people that are doing the jobs and insight that you can carry forward, and compassion for how hard it is to make and sell any product. So it's a great thing. You see, I feel sorry in a way for some of these new businesses now. They've had $1 million investment or millions of dollars investment before they've they haven't even touched the product. They have never made the product. And I feel sorry for them. And I think not all the time, but sometimes that can be a real disadvantage and cause problems in a company. So it's good to do everything, but in every job, and learn it. But at the same time, it's really feels great when you can shed one job and it makes you better at the things you're still doing, and it makes the company better. So fire yourself when you can.
I really I can hear it resonating through in terms of the gratitude that you have for your son-in-law, Jamie Athos. And, obviously the proof's in the pudding. He's been doing a bang up job. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. Getting out of your own way is what you're saying there. You touched on nonprofits, and I know in preparation for our conversation today, what I seemed to pick up on was your love and affinity for animal sanctuaries and nonprofits. And I was wondering if there was more to that story in terms of animal sanctuaries, because I know where I am up here near Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, there are a lot of animal sanctuaries right now that I hope do get a chance to watch this and take some nuggets and tidbits from you, because it's a tough world to be in. And I was wondering if there was more to the story with your love and affinity for animal sanctuaries.
Yeah, I think that my love for animal sanctuary comes down to the farm sanctuary, which was the first big animal sanctuary for farm animals in the United States. It was started by Gene Bauer and Lori Boston in 1980 something, and they were selling vegan hot dogs at Grateful Dead concerts. And then they found a sheep that was in the bad straits, Hilda, and they took it in their van and they healed it and cared for it. And then now they have 3 large sanctuaries, and the biggest one is in Watkins Glen, New York. And in 2012, I was invited to go out there to deliver a talk at Thanksgiving on Tofurky. And it was just such a magic experience, because I was really, I had been through several vegan periods in my diet, but I was like very close, but I wasn't completely vegan at that point. And then after being at that sanctuary and having eyeball to eyeball contact, with the turkeys and chickens and pigs, I was just like, it just changed my heart. And so because of that personal experience at that animal sanctuary, I saw the power to change people's lives. People, if they want to complain about animal sanctuaries, they go, well, there's 10 billion animals that are killed every year, and you're saving like a very fraction of a percent of that, but I don't think that's true, because I think, that the power in animal sanctuaries is immense, for just the same experience that I had of people coming to this place. And once they get to know that an animal has the same, passion for life that you do, and just wants to live and be with their friends and family, and that they're these sentient beings that fear love and respond to love and feel pain and fear, just like we do. That just because they can't talk English doesn't mean that they don't have the same feelings that we all share as animals on this planet. So I think that animal sanctuaries have a great power. So I do have a soft spot for them, and for other nonprofits too, because we're all fighting for the same goal, which is to wean the world off of animal food. And the nonprofits are really our unpaid marketing arm of Tofurky. So why not support them? They deserve our support and our love and encouragement. So I just think the world of all of these people that decide to dedicate their life to changing people's attitudes through having these sanctuaries. And I think they're very effective.
And as a follow-up to that, I'm wondering down where you are, whether that's in Oregon or nationally across America, um, is there anything that you know of in terms of law and creating laws for animals? Because what you said about whether it was slavery or same-sex marriage or whatever it is, the human condition, it doesn't really seem like there's going to be a gigantic shift or change until there is that line in the sand that no, this is illegal. And based on the fact that these animals have a set of eyes, a head, and a heart, just like us, they do deserve some similar rights. That's drawn into the legal constitution. Is there anything that you're hip to that I might not know about where you live or in and across America in terms of establishing laws and rights for animals?
Yeah, oh yeah, there's a lot going on. I think just right off comes to mind is the work of Steve Wise, who is the non-human rights project, and where he's establishing personhood for everything from captive gorillas and monkeys to other animals. So that's a real worthy project. But and state by state, there's laws. It's just so crazy that we have laws for cats and dogs and animals like that. Like if somebody were to beat your dog, everybody would be up in arms and demanding justice and jail time for the abuser, and rightfully so. But on the other hand, that's kind of the standard practice of a lot of the way that farm animals are treated in these horrific conditions. And so, I mean, you really see a lot of sort of important work, but it's very step by step, kind of like right now is a very challenging time, from farm animals and the way that they're treated, and that awareness really hasn't grown to the point where it's been politically popular for politicians down here to get behind the treatment. But it is coming, and there's more and more information on that now, and I think that in 100 years that we will see a tidal wave shift, and we will look back onto our habit of eating animals in much the same way that we look back to the slavery norm of 100 plus years ago. And not that, have we completely eradicated racism from our society? No. But is it like a very fringe, extreme belief? Well, yes, but there's still parts of us that, in spite of our best intentions, we could always do better. And I think that'll be like that in animal being raised for food too. There'll be an extreme. It'll be an extreme view, and it will not be the paradigm, the dominant paradigm that it is today. And the general feeling in 100 years will be, what were they thinking and why were they doing that? So I think that's going to be something that is going to be eradicated from society as more and more people understand the truly what's happening in these slaughterhouses and in these camps, and certainly in the pandemic period too. That so many of these viruses jump from animals, and these factory farms are like breeding grounds for this. And I think that coming out of this virus, that we'll see more and more people starting to connect those dots, that people don't want to go back in this situation again. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's really wonderful. I don't feel like in this conversation I need to really dive too much into what has Tofurky done in terms of COVID to establish protocols. You had mentioned Jamie had, really made sure that level of communication with your team had been fulfilled, and just the very nature of the compassionate products that you're all producing. There's no heightened risk there, so I don't really feel like we need to dive into that. But one thing I did want to dive into a little bit, if we could, is the fact that this is the last Monday in May, which is Mental Health Awareness Month. And I'm wondering whether it's for you, Seth, personally with your family, or the culture that you guys have created at Tofurky. Are there any tips, tricks, things that are related to one's own mental health that you would like to touch on at all for everybody listening?
Yeah, sure. Well, personally, I'm a big believer in fun and humor as, an antidote to existential nausea and the blues or depression, and not taking yourself too seriously. We tried to bake into our DNA the fun lightheartedness. Even Tofurky is kind of a name that brings a smile to people's face. And once you share a laugh with somebody, it's a real bonding thing with them. And people remember a joke. They forget statistics and things that they should. But having a laugh a day, and we've certainly provided many laughs to people, over the years. But even within the company, I think trying to build humor into our marketing, that was one of the real things about Tofurky, was just trying to be lighthearted. Like you don't need to be pretentious. Sometimes I think we as vegans come across as holier than thou and pretentious, despite our best intentions. And it's just really beautiful when you can like humor establishes a bond, but it establishes a an atmosphere where people just feel, it's a human trait. We're the otters of the universe, and I think that we need to really learn to laugh and laugh at ourselves a lot of times too. Having humility. I think laughing at yourself brings humility, and always having, humility is really an important trait as well. Once you've spent 10 years of your life on living in a tree and on $300 a month, it does kind of naturally bring both humility and a little PTSD along with it, in a kind of a good way, a reminder that, of how things were. And, I think that, Lao Tzu said it right, that the only people that can be trusted with power are the ones that don't want it, and just have, this way of embracing people and building people up as opposed to tearing people down. So I would just say life's too short not to love everybody, and it's way too long to hate, so come with humor, come with love, come with humility, and you'll have a pretty good life.
Powerful, powerful. Now, before we get into perhaps, what might be in store for yourself or for the company in the future moving forward, I'm curious as to if you, and no right or wrong answer here, do you feel as if there is a difference between plant-based and vegan?
Well, the way we basically use the terms interchangeably in our marketing. Some people prefer, they feel like plant-based is not as uh, threatening or whatever a word is veganism, that there's more attached to veganism in a negative way, but we use them both. And the way it's been explained to me is that veganism is a lifestyle. It's not just food. It's like what you wear, not wearing leather, not going to zoos and aquariums, and just the whole lifestyle of respecting animals. And whereas plant-based is really just the food angle, and it doesn't, like you could wear a leather jacket or leather shoes and still be plant-based, but you couldn't in a technical form as a vegan. But there again, I mean, the vegan, we don't need, everybody has to be their own police. We don't need to be shaming other people as vegan, or you're not as vegan as I am. And I don't think that that's in anybody's interest, that we really need to welcome people. I mean, look at me. I mean, I became a vegetarian in 1971, and then whatever, 30 years later, 40 years later, became vegan for life. I mean, I'd been vegan back and forth. So I think that let's not worry too much about every little detail. Let's do the best job we can, and let's embrace people from where they are and encourage them, whatever they are on this path.
That's great to hear. And in terms of what is in store for the future of Tofurky for yourself, is there anything that is on the horizon that is of excitement for you guys, or something that you want to share a little bit here with us?
Yeah, I know that we were, before COVID, we had planned to go to a natural products expo in Anaheim, California, which is the biggest trade show of its kind in the world. And we were going to launch, we had two booths, one for the Tofurky products and another for this new brand, Mucho brand of cheese that we wanted. We'd been working on this for literally 5 years, because cheese is often a stumbling block for people that keeps them from being vegan. And so we just wanted to create a stellar vegan cheese, and it took us a long time. And now we have something that we like, and we have shreds, we have cream cheeses, spreadable cheeses, and they're really, really good. So I think that is going to be great. We really, cheese has come a long way. In 1990 something was the first vegan cheese that I ever saw, and back then it just wasn't very good. I mean, cow cheeses and have had centuries literally to develop and to get everything dialed in, but vegan cheese, is a relatively new thing. So I think we need to give it time, but it's gotten so good and so much better. You have Miyoko's cheese up and coming now. I mean, they've done an amazing job, and Miyoko's an amazing person. And Daya does a good job. They're right up there in Vancouver, I know. And before Daya, really, there was this joke about vegan cheeses, and the joke back in the 90s was, did you hear about the fire in the vegan cheese factory? Cheese still didn't melt. It was perfect the next day. And that was kind of the way people thought about vegan cheese, and they were right. You just couldn't melt it. I mean, you could eat it, but it wasn't that great. So we've come a long way, but we got a lot longer to go as a company, and also as a nation of plant eaters.
Yeah, so for those of you watching who obviously like everybody aren't able to make it out to CHFA and not able to make it out to the Veg Expos and all the things where we would probably see the launch and distribution of Mucho. You heard it here first. You can watch out for that coming. As all the products are delicious, I'm sure that one's not going to fail in any respect as well. And we had a comment here that I just want to ask. It was a question, if you would. So, Seth, thoughts on the 50-50% half meat, half plant-based products that traditional meat producing companies are putting into stores now? Do we really need this transition food as being better for health when it's still 50% meat?
Yeah, that's a great question. I saw that from Helen, and I've always felt like that was a weird concept. But there is the some potential in that. Like if you think of like, let's just say that every producer of animal meat were to find a way to do that, that would be a pretty big impact onto the overall health of the planet if you cut, like, just by doing that, meat production down to by 50%. Like, whoa, I mean, so rationally, scientifically, from that standpoint, I'm for anything that saves lives and for that really reduces the need for animals to die and for the pasture lands that are having to encroach on the Amazon and even, forests and land in Canada and the US and everywhere else. So I would see it as a baby step. And sometimes, we need to have these steps that really encourage us to go further. So maybe it's a gateway drug, and it gets people thinking about their eating and their food. And at the same time, it's healthy for them and healthy for the environment, healthy for the animals. So I'm not opposed to it by any means.
Yeah, and thank you. Forgive me. I know when I was having the difficulties and then pop back on, you were answering Sandra's question. So forgive me if you had already answered Helen's question there. And so, one very obscure question from me to you is: do you in Oregon? Do you have a favorite hot spring?
I do. I have my favorite hot spring in Oregon and in all the world is the Alvord Desert Hot Spring down in the far southeast corner of Oregon, and it looks out over a 25-mile by 10-mile across alkali lake bed, and it is just stark country, and it's this beautiful, beautiful place that to quote a famous Canadian songwriter, everybody knows this is nowhere. Do you know that quote? You're too young. Stephen Stills.
Nice. Yeah, my I asked that question because my wife and we had one heck of a time at the Umpqua Hot Springs. So I knew, you being a local there to Oregon, that you had one that I didn't know about. So I'll definitely check that out. Um, so what I would like to do is once again uh, make it through here. Uh, Remind everybody, wherever you get your books, be on the lookout for The Search of the Wild Tofurky: How a Business Misfit Pioneered Plant-Based Foods Before They Were Cool. So this is Seth Tibbott's new book, out everywhere that you get books. Be on the lookout for that. And I wanted to leave the floor open to you, Seth, if you had any parting words for everybody who's going to be able to either watch this with us here today live or watching the replay. The floor is open to you, Seth. Take it away.
Yeah, no, I just want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank you, Justin, for reaching out. It's very generous of you. And, I feel this incredible momentum right now on the that's bubbling up to the surface. It takes time for these um, new ideas to take place, but the movement from animal-based meat to plant-based meats is the biggest, I think, social justice movement, really, or one of the biggest that we've probably ever seen in the history of the planet. It's so deeply ingrained, and yet, I think that it's going to rapidly pick up pace in the coming decades, and we will definitely see a world that is very different oriented in where it gets its protein in 20 years, 50 years, 100 years. It's just inspiring. It's breathtaking for me to look back, to where things were in the 1970s, and where you couldn't even buy granola except in these little boutique shops. And now, you have just plant-based everything. It's hard to think of a food that is not, that is made in an animal base that is not plant-based now. So I can feel it. It's coming, and it's coming hard. And, the more you can embrace it in your life is going to be something that you'll look back on and say, this was the greatest thing that I ever did, and I have no regrets. And I think that you'll be on the right side of history. So jump on board, and, if do it as whatever way you can. If it's like cheese, you can't give up cheese right now. Do the best you can, because maybe you will later on down the road. Meatballs, be a meatball vegetarian. Like, there's some great vegan meatballs, by the way. But whatever. My point is that whatever steps you can make, please make them, and be happy that you did, and you'll feel great. The planet will feel great, and it's just really good to be on board with and be alive at a time when people are just starting to figure this out. And so thank you, everybody, for whatever you have done and what you can do. And I want to thank the people that have commented in there. Helen, thanks for having a frozen Tofurky in your refrigerator right now. And Sandra and everybody, really appreciate you chatting in. And Justin, thank you so much. It's been awesome spending time with y'all.
Yeah, thank you so much. And for the meat eaters and the vegans and everybody in between watching, there was some real knowledge dropped by Seth, which is exactly what I thought was going to happen. And Seth, for you, I really admire your compassion and your humor. I knew even coming into the call, I was going to be smiling and laughing a lot just by doing a little bit of research. So thank you for that. And for what it's worth, next time you and the family come up in the Vancouver, Canada area, please do let me know, because I'd love to take you around, show you all the things that you were mentioning in terms of up and coming companies in and around here, and the relationships that we have, the community that we have up here, and we can have a day together. And so again, lastly, for everybody here, just a quote by Guy Raz: Seth Tibbott is an American original. His story is so outlandish, so unbelievable, you'd think it was fiction. And be sure to make sure that you check out For the Search of the Wild Tofurky, How a Business Misfit Pioneered Plant-Based Foods Before They Were Cool. Thank you so much for joining us today, Seth. Take care.
Thank you, Justin.
Bye
See
now.
ya. Cheers.